Okay, so Science 10, Chemistry Unit, Section 2.2, Part 3, another super short section. So we've looked at atomic theory and the organization of the periodic table. So now we're going to look at some trends on the periodic table. So periodic table and ion formation. Atoms gain or lose electrons or share them to form bonds. So in order for an ion to be formed, an atom needs to either gain or lose electrons to form bonds. It is also possible to form bonds through sharing electrons. This is not referring to ions. Atoms become electrically charged particles called ions. Metals lose electrons and become positive ions. So this is referring to cations. So super cheesy way to remember this, either cats are good, so they are positive, referring to their paws, or you can remember that cats have paws, so positive, paws sounds like positive. So remember it however you want, but these are just helpful ways to remember it. So at the bottom, we can see calcium in the middle has 20 protons, and an atom of calcium has 20 electrons. So that's what's shown here in the neutral atom. Calcium will give up 2 electrons to, say, a non-metal and become a cation with a +2 charge. So that's what's shown down here. So, and this +2 comes from the fact that it has 2 less negative charges than the positive charge. So meaning it has an overall net positive charge. Some metals lose electrons in different ways. These are referred to as being multivalent. So iron, for example, would be an example of this. You can see that it has 2 different charges present. For example, iron, Fe, loses 2 electrons, making it Fe2+, or loses 3 electrons, making it Fe3+. So usually these are the transition metals in the middle of the periodic table. They have multiple possible charges, and this is where the term multivalent comes from. So iron can lose 3 electrons, or it can lose 2 electrons, and it will form a different ion depending on how many electrons it loses. So if it loses 3, it becomes Fe3+. If it loses 2, it becomes Fe2+. Iron loses 3 electrons more than 2 electrons, and this is why it appears on top in the list of charges on the periodic table. So again, a neutral atom, shown here of iron, has 26 electrons and 26 protons. So nonmetals gain electrons and become negative ions, referred to as anions. If you have more electrons, you have more negative charges, and therefore an overall negative charge. The word anion sort of looks like an onion. So onions are bad because they make you cry. Again, a little bit of a stretch. So anions are negative. So again, just another thing to help you remember this. Atoms gain and lose electrons in an attempt to have the same number of valence electrons, which are the electrons furthest from the nucleus, referring to the last outer shell, as the nearest noble gas in the periodic table. So that's always how you can tell how many electrons an atom will gain or lose. It is based on where they are on the periodic table and how many outer electrons they have versus how many they need to gain or lose to be like the closest noble gas with a full outer ring. If we have oxygen, for example, which has an atomic number of 8, meaning it has 8 protons, so the neutral atom would also have 8 electrons. In order to be like neon, which is the closest noble gas, it needs to gain 2 electrons, giving it a negative 10 charge for electrons and a positive 8 charge based on the protons. So the overall charge for it then would be negative 2, because 10 electrons, which are negative, and 8 protons, which are positive. So negative 2 charge, also shown here. A little bit of review before you go and get too far ahead. Check in with these and make sure you understand and know these before you move on to the next video. It is also good to know that you do have a periodic table on page 97 of your notes to refer to while you're working through. But that is the end of this part of the section.